boxing news.
Ow! Okay, we'll start with this. What could be the updates to the women's ring IQ pound-for-pound list based on tonight's contest? Later on today, Alicia Baumgardner will make her undisputed bid opposite the ring France's own Khaled. If number 6 ranked Alicia Baumgardner is successful and she beats Khaled and becomes her division's undisputed champion, that will give her a credible enough argument to advance from number 6 to number 5 ahead of Senicia Estrada. Two division champion Senicia Estrada, who will be in action very soon opposite the ring, Tina Ruprecht, Germany's own WBC minimum weight champion, for what is their unification match at minimum weight. The way it breaks down, if Alicia wins tonight, she'll move ahead of Senicia. Move up to number 5. Move up to number 5 on the premise that both Alicia and Senicia Estrada, they've beaten two reigning world champions apiece. Senicia Estrada beat Annabelle Ortiz and Tenkai Tsunami. Alicia Baumgardner, she beat Terry Harper and Michaela Mayer. They both beat two world champions apiece, but if Alicia becomes her division's undisputed champion, that will give her a credible enough argument to inch past Senicia Estrada, even if it's just momentarily. Don't forget, Senicia's next fight is a unification match, a unification bout with another champion. If she beats Tina Ruprecht, that might give her a credible enough argument to reclaim that number 5 spot. Points for style. Though as stated, if Alicia is successful later on today, she will move from number 6 up to number 5. That's if Alicia wins. If it happens the other way, and Khaled shocks the world, if she becomes the super featherweight division's undisputed champion, per the rules that govern the list, no fighter absent of a world title coming right off a loss is allowed to maintain a rank. The list is only for winners and only for champions, and if Khaled becomes this division's undisputed champion, she'll come in the bottom tier at number 10, and Alicia, in effect, would be bumped off per the rules that govern the list. The list is only for winners and only for champions. No fighter coming right off a loss, absent of a world title, is allowed to maintain a rank. I will say that that's not what I'm expecting. I am expecting Alicia to win tonight's fight. I am expecting Khaled to try to make a statement, be aggressive, close the distance on Alicia, and I'm expecting Alicia to pick her off with counter punches. I'm expecting Elham to try to jab her way in, and I'm expecting Alicia to counter that jab with a right hand over the top, not dissimilar from what we just saw in the Mayer fight. I'm expecting that if by some chance Elham can get within striking distance of Alicia, Alicia is strong enough and fit enough to fight her off and fight the fight at her own tempo, at her own pace. So I am going with Alicia to secure the W later on today, and if she does, she'll move from number 6 up to number 4. When it comes to the undisputed featherweight title fight, the main event. Main event between Amanda Serrano, who ranks in at number 3 on the ring IQ pound-for-pound list, and Mexico's own Erica Cruz, who isn't featured. She hasn't cracked the list yet. If she were to upset the apple cart for Amanda, if she were to beat the odds, she would be integrated into the list in the bottom tier on the premise that that's the second world champion Erica will have won belts from. The first one was Jelena Marjanovic of Canada, then WBA champion. In that scenario, Amanda would be the second. However, I don't actually think Erica's going to beat Amanda. I've got Amanda winning that Erica Cruz fight and becoming her division's undisputed champion. If she does, she will advance from number 3 up to number 2, past Clarissa Shields. She'll advance ahead of Clarissa on the premise that Erica Cruz would be the 4th reigning world champion that Amanda Serrano won belts from. The scalp of Erica Cruz would tie them. Amanda Serrano beat Maria Maderna and Heather Hardy, Sarah Mahfoud, Erica Cruz. In this scenario, that would tie them as Clarissa Shields beat Nikki Adler and Christina Hammer, Marie-Eve Dicaire, more recently Savannah Marshall, champions that they won belts from. Beating Erica Cruz for the undisputed featherweight championship would be enough for Amanda to surpass Clarissa on the list on the premise that they've beaten the same number of champions, but Amanda's been a champion at far more weights than Clarissa. Clarissa is a 3-division champion, whereas Amanda is a 7-division champion. If she beats Erica Cruz later on today, she will have tied Clarissa with the number of championship scalps that she has collected, and she will in effect become an undisputed champion with a more robust body of work by far and wide than Clarissa's.
Mandia would move up to number 2.
Clarissa would lose a bit of ground. She'd end up at number 3, making the potential Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano fight a clash between the number 1 and number 2 pound-for-pound fighters in the sport.
You can make the argument that Clarissa Shields has become an undisputed champion more times than Amanda Serrano has at more weights, but many of those titles were vacant.
And in previous instances, many of the titles that Amanda won were vacant, but Amanda has won more of those titles at more weights than Clarissa.
And if she wins tonight, at minimum, she will tie Clarissa for the number of championship scalps she has collected.
So all of this could break down if Amanda beats Erica and if Alicia beats Elham. We'll see what happens. We then come to last night's barn burner in the men's super featherweight division for what was the vacant WBO title fight between Emmanuel Navarrete, the 2, now 3 division champion, and spirited contender Liam Wilson of Australia. This turned out to be a much better fight than I anticipated. On paper, Liam Wilson...
I don't think many people gave Liam Wilson a shot based on what you saw on paper.
He came into this fight with a professional record of just 10 wins with 1 loss, 1 knockout loss.
He didn't seem anywhere near as experienced a professional as 2-division champion Emmanuel Navarrete.
I think most people were expecting El Vaquero to plow through Liam Wilson, and he did anything but that. He had to battle through some adversity, serious adversity. I want to say that when Emmanuel was making his ring walk, he didn't seem all that switched on, didn't seem tuned in.
Inspired.
Motivated, and some discrepancies as to what really happened at the weigh-in for the fight. Suspicions that the scale was adjusted in order for Emmanuel Navarrete to make weight.
That he might have actually blown the weight, but the powers that be covered it up by calibrating the scale, recalibrating the scale.
In tandem with the additional time to recover, he was allowed mid-fight after Liam sat him down, sat him on his back pocket. This fight has left us with a lot to reflect upon, so let's talk about the fight. Let's talk about the fight itself. Now, normally, Emmanuel Navarrete goes into a fight with a noticeable height and reach advantage at super bantamweight,
featherweight.
He's big for those weights, but he's not as big, doesn't have as big an advantage as Liam Wilson was a few inches taller than Emmanuel Navarrete. A little bigger, certainly bigger than the guys Emmanuel normally fights, like Pitufo Diaz and Isaac Dogbe.
Bigger guy than the guys you normally see Emmanuel Navarrete fight. In this situation, in this fight, Emmanuel didn't have a size advantage.
A height advantage, a reach advantage, and I think that was noticeable in how the fight played out.
Emmanuel, he also looked a bit soft in the body.
Moving up from featherweight up to super featherweight proved difficult. You often hear it said that on the way up, you tend to lose something, that you may not be the guy at the next weight that you were downstairs.
You may not be the same guy that you lose something on the way up.
To some degree, I think that's what we saw yesterday. Emmanuel Navarrete, he's not a textbook boxer. He's quite unconventional, quite unorthodox, and awkward. He normally has a height advantage and a reach advantage, so much so that from the outside coming in, he can lunge in, touch a guy with shots.
The other guy can't do much about it.
Because of Emmanuel Navarrete's height advantage and reach advantage. Emmanuel Navarrete is an according to Hoyle pressure fighter, but even amongst pressure fighters, not all of them are created equal, where some pressure is more constant, consistent. Emmanuel,
he's an ambush fighter.
He explodes and unleashes a salvo of punches, a barrage of shots.
Not all pressure fighters are created equal.
It's the difference between a Jessica McCaskill, for example, and a Christina Lenardatu. Some pressure fighters like to apply constant pressure. Other pressure fighters like to explode on their opponents.
Even if they have the same sweet spot, there are subtle differences, and that's one among them.
In the case of Emmanuel Navarrete, who normally goes into a fight with a noticeable height advantage and a reach advantage, where normally he can touch a guy with shots from the outside coming in.
Because he's got so much reach on the other guy.
The other guy ends up being within striking distance of Emmanuel, but Emmanuel, he's not within striking distance of the other guy. So he can afford to take those big chances, those big mistakes.
Make mistakes because the other guy can't really make him pay for it.
Liam Wilson could, however. Liam Wilson did. Being careful, working off the counter.
Careful not to trade punches with Emmanuel Navarrete in the early goings of this match, and working off the counter.
Normally, Emmanuel Navarrete could afford to make mistakes like lunging in, leaning over his lead foot in order to get within striking distance of an opponent. And those big shovel uppercuts, where normally he can get away with doing stuff like that. Liam Wilson.
He wasn't just defensively responsible. It's not just being defensively responsible. It's also Liam's physical dimensions that allowed him to effectively counter Emmanuel Navarrete as he tried to close the distance.
Catch and shoot. Parry what you can, counter what you can, and capitalize off his mistakes.
Because Liam Wilson is a bit taller, bit longer than the average guy that shares the ring with El Vaquero, he was able to effectively offset some of Emmanuel's aggression and counter him.
Tack on that because he's bigger than a super bantamweight or a featherweight, he's got a bit more durability than those guys do. Those guys down at 122, those guys down at 126, that if something does get through,
he can weather the punch.
He can take it. It took a while for Emmanuel to find his groove, and that wasn't before Liam Wilson almost shocked him, dropped him.
I think that was in round 4. He dropped him in round 4, and he hurt him again in round 6.
Came very close to stopping Emmanuel Navarrete, and at minimum, he found out early on in this fight that he can hurt this guy. If he gets off the right counter shot, he can take him out. But I think inexperience is what led to Liam Wilson letting Emmanuel off the hook.
Because he did let him off the hook. He did let him recover.
Regain his faculties where he should have jumped on him.
You have to remember, ahead of this fight, Liam Wilson only had something like, 10 or 11 fights?
He wasn't as experienced, anywhere near as experienced at this level as Emmanuel Navarrete.
Veteran tactics after being knocked down in the 4th, spitting out his gum shield to buy himself additional time to recover. He was so clearly hurt.
He's no squirrely amateur. He's a champion, a 2-division champion, and he knew exactly what he was doing. I want to say that
you can chalk that up to experience on Emmanuel Navarrete's part and inexperience on Liam Wilson's part.
Liam Wilson really was just one clean counter away, one more from becoming a world champion, but he kind of blew it.
Emmanuel regained his composure, regained his faculties, got into a groove, and started overwhelming Liam.
Pace of the fight finally wore on Liam's energy reserves as Emmanuel Navarrete launched himself forward, unleashing salvos of punches.
Liam gassed out.
He's just not accustomed to dealing with this caliber of fighter on this kind of stage.
I wouldn't mind seeing a rematch.
In any event, Emmanuel Navarrete, his championship experience, was able to hit the next gear in order to secure the W and become a 3-division champion.
Stopping Liam Wilson in the 9th round. Credit to him.
That was a Fight of the Year candidate is what that was, and it's only February.
Further indication that when you move up in weight, you do lose something on the way up.
Before this fight, Emmanuel, he didn't look too hot his last time out ahead of this Liam Wilson fight. And this Liam Wilson fight, once again, he went out there and he looked human.
Things you want to think about ahead of what could be an Oscar Valdez fight later on this year. Oscar was in attendance for the match,
scouting the winner. About 3 days ago, ahead of this weekend's fight, top-rank impresario Bob Arum stated he expects Navarrete versus Wilson winner to defend the WBO title against Oscar Valdez. That was the plan.
That's still the plan.
100%. Not even a question. That's the plan. Whoever wins is an understanding that they'll fight Valdez.
It is possible, though, that Valdez could take a tune-up bout before fighting for the WBO title. He lost to Shakur Stevenson last April. Valdez could use some rounds because he hasn't fought since the Stevenson fight.
I hardly expect Oscar to go straight into the fight with Emmanuel Navarrete, having not fought since April of last year and coming right off of a back injury.
The fight's aesthetic, yesterday's fight, lends itself to helping to promote that Oscar Valdez fight on the premise that now Emmanuel Navarrete, he looks a bit more beatable, a bit more human.
Oscar's gotta like that.
The 32-year-old Valdez was tentatively scheduled to return to the ring November 12th at the Palms Casino Resort in Las Vegas, but he suffered an injury, which also wasn't disclosed. During the broadcast, yesterday's broadcast, Oscar detailed what happened, that he suffered a back injury.
And he thought that he was all right.
Because he thought he was all right, but that nagging injury reared its ugly head again. Thus, he was unable to compete. It was supposed to be Oscar and Emmanuel sharing the ring with each other.
Gotta reschedule.
Emmanuel Navarrete held up his end of the bargain. He had to go through some adversity to do it, but he remains in the winner's bracket, and he is now a 3-division champion. Oscar's got to hold up his end of the bargain now.
It happens. He's a really dedicated athlete. He doesn't cruise around and so forth. But because sometimes your body betrays you, and that's been the case with Oscar, we'll have to see. He's a great talent. He'll get healed, and we'll give him his shot. There's no shame in losing to Shakur. How many fighters out there are gonna beat Shakur? He was in the fight. He tried hard, but Shakur's a master. Shakur is something special.
The stylistic matchup between Shakur Stevenson and Oscar Valdez is very different to the stylistic matchup between Oscar and Emmanuel. Shakur
Stevenson versus Valdez was pure boxer versus boxer puncher, and that stylistic matchup favors the pure boxer.
Whereas Valdez versus Navarrete, that's boxer puncher versus pressure fighter, and that stylistic matchup, that favors the boxer puncher.
Oscar's the boxer puncher, and we've already seen Oscar in that kind of matchup at least once before. Opposite the ring, then WBC champion,
WBC super featherweight champion Miguel Berchelt. That fight ended in dramatic fashion. And when you consider how Emmanuel Navarrete looked yesterday opposite the ring, Liam Wilson, could Oscar Valdez, a more experienced fighter and a former champion, could he do better?
Yeah, I think he can.
Some may point to extenuating circumstances as being the root cause for Miguel Berchelt being stopped the way he got stopped, that he contracted COVID and he had a hard camp, he was struggling in weight.
Struggling to make it.
More than one thing can be true at the same time, but that stylistic matchup, it did favor the boxer puncher. That's usually what happens when boxer punchers face pressure fighters, and Emmanuel Navarrete, he's a pressure fighter that just looked very human opposite the ring, a more green fighter than Oscar.
I expect that Emmanuel will now vacate his WBO featherweight title and stay at super featherweight.
I expect that the upcoming Isaac Dogbate versus Robeisy Ramirez fight will be elevated from an interim title fight, to a full title fight for the full WBO title.
I expect that Oscar Valdez may take a tune-up fight within the next few weeks.
I expect that if Oscar makes it through that tune-up fight, they will reschedule Valdez versus Navarrete for later on this year.
That's what I'm expecting.